Welcome to another episode of Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your haunted host, Dom, and in this episode we'll be talking about the 2015 gothic horror film directed, written, and produced by Guillermo del Toro, Crimson Peak. With a certain film having come out recently, I thought it would be fun to talk about this film as it could have been an adaptation of that film. And I really don't want to promote that film in any way, so I'll mention it sparingly. But you'll get what I mean, what film I'm talking about. Not Crimson Peak, but the movie that I don't want to name, as it might be kind of promoting it. So let's sip your tea and lock yourself away as we talk about Del Toro's version of The Haunted Mansion. After the release of Pan's Labyrinth in 2006, Del Toro and Matthew Robbins wrote the original spec script for Crimson Peak, and it sold quietly to Donna Langley at Universal. Del Toro planned the film to follow Pan's Labyrinth, but postponed the project to make Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. Once again, he postponed the film to work on the Hobbit films, which eventually went through development hell, and he ended up leaving the project, unfortunately. Donna Langley suggested that Del Toro produce the film and allow another director take over the reins, but could not find one he deemed suitable. After he developed a good working relationship with Legendary Entertainment's Thomas Tull and John Jeschney while directing Pacific Rim, they asked Del Toro what he wanted to do next, and he sent them his screenplays for a film adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness, a Western adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo, and Crimson Peak. The producers deemed the last of these the best project for us, just the right size. Universal allowed Del Toro to move the project to Legendary, with the caveat that they could put up money for a stake in the film. Del Toro called the film a ghost story with gothic romance, and described it as a very set-oriented, classical, but at the same time modern take on the ghost story. He said that the film would allow him to play with the genre's conventions while subverting their rules, and stated, "I think people are getting used to horror subjects done as found footage or B-value budgets. I wanted this to feel like a throwback." Del Toro wanted the film to honor the grand dames of the haunted house genre, namely Robert Weiss's The Haunting and Jack Clayton's The Innocents, wanting to make a large-scale horror film in the tradition of those he grew up on, such as The Omen, The Exorcist, and The Shining. He cited the latter as another Mount Everest of the haunted house movie, praising the high production values and Stanley Kubrick's control over the large sets. Though she is not credited in the finished film, British playwright Lucinda Coxon was enlisted to rewrite the script with Del Toro, in hopes of bringing it to a proper degree of perversity and intelligence. Honestly, I really think this helped to get the period feel and was a great idea if it was Del Toro or another producer's. Benedict Cumberbatch and Emma Stone were originally set, but both dropped out of the production. Tom Hiddleston and Mia, I'm probably going to mess up her name from now on because I think I know how to pronounce it, but just bear with me. Wasikowska took over their respective roles, making the film their second collaboration after only Lovers Left Alive. Crimson Peak is also the second collaboration between Wasikowska and Chastain after starring together in Lawless. The film was titled Haunted Peak while under production, a title used only for the studio booking. So now let us discover the ghosts of Allerdale Hall.
Ghosts are real. That much I know. I've seen them all my life.
Would you be mine? Edith, this is my sister.
I don't think she's the right choice.
You have to trust me.
Thomas, your bride is frozen.
I'll run you a hot bath.
There are parts of the house that are unsafe. What was that?
A house as old as this one becomes, in time, a living thing.
Never go below this level.
It starts holding on to things.
Has anyone died in this house? Specific deaths, violent deaths.
In your own best interest, proceed with caution.
Keeping them alive when they shouldn't be.
If you're here with me, give me a signal.
She knows everything.
Do we have to do this? Must we?
Yes. You have no idea what they do.
What do you want? I have to leave.
You have nowhere else to go. This is your home now.
In 1887 Buffalo, New York, a young Edith Cushing, played by Sophia Wells, is visited by the ghost of her mother, who warns her, beware of Crimson Peak. Flash forward to 1901, Edith, now played by Mia Wasikowska, is now a budding author, meets Baronet Sir Thomas Sharp, played by Tom Hiddleston, who is seeking investors for his invention, a digging machine to revive his family's clay mines. But Edith's father, Carter Cushing, played by Jim Beaver, rejects his proposal. Edith asks Thomas to read her manuscript, and eventually the two would become romantically attached, leading her father to hire a private detective, a man named Holly, played by Bern Gorman, to uncover unsavory facts about Sharp and his sister Lucille, who's portrayed by Jessica Chastain. Mr. Cushing bribes them to leave America, forcing Thomas to break Edith's heart by disparaging her and her novel. While Mr. Cushing is shaving alone, he is brutally murdered, raising the suspicions of Edith's childhood friend, Dr. Alan McMichael, played by Charlie Hunnam. Thomas returns Edith's manuscript with a letter explaining that her father was the cause for his actions, and they reconcile. Thomas marries Edith, giving her a ring taken from Lucille, and they arrive at Allerdale Hall, the Sharps' dilapidated Cumberland mansion, which is sinking into the red clay mine below. Lucille piles Edith with tea made from the firethorn berries, and Thomas persuades her to put her father's fortune toward his machine. He mentions that the estate is referred to as Crimson Peak due to the warm red clay seeping through the winter snow. This gives Edith pause as she remembers the ghost of her mother. Edith begins to notice Thomas's absence from their shared bedroom during the night. She eventually grows weak and begins coughing up blood, plagued by nightmares and visited by gruesome red ghosts around Allerdale. One of the spirits tricks her into opening a closet, where she discovers wax phonograph cylinders before chasing her into the cellar, where she finds a locked trunk engraved with the name Enola. Thomas takes Edith on a trip to the local post office, where she recovers a letter addressed to E. Sharp. Snowed in for the night, they finally make love, which Lucille is infuriated to learn. Edith steals a key from Lucille bearing the inscription Enola, and unlocks the trunk to find a gramophone and secret documents. Using the gramophone to listen to the audio recordings on the wax cylinders, and while reading the paper documents, Edith learns that Thomas previously married 3 other wealthy women, including Enola Ciati, the letter's intended recipient, and that Lucille has been poisoning Edith with tea as part of the siblings' marriage and murder scheme to finance Thomas's inventions. During this time, Alan has learned from Holly what Mr. Cushing uncovered about the Sharps, Thomas's multiple marriages, and Lucille's time in a mental institution, and suspecting they murdered Mr. Cushing. He travels to Allerdale Hall to rescue Edith. Edith confronts her husband and sister-in-law, catching them in an incestuous embrace, and Lucille pushes her from a balcony. Alan arrives just after she has been pushed. Tending to her injuries, Alan prepares to leave with Edith, but Lucille stabs him and demands that Thomas finish the job. Thomas instead inflicts a non-fatal stab wound to Alan before hiding him in the cellar. Lucille forces Edith to sign a transfer deed granting the Sharps ownership of her estate and confessing to have murdered Thomas's previous wives and having borne a child with Thomas that soon died. These are the ghosts that have appeared to Edith. Lucille admits to murdering Edith's father as well as her own mother when she discovered Lucille and Thomas's sexual relationship. Edith stabs Lucille with her pen and flees, but is confronted by Thomas, who has truly fallen in love with her. He burns the deed and begs his sister to join him and Edith in a new life together, but an enraged Lucille stabs him to death. She pursues Edith with the cleaver she used to kill her mother, but is halted by Thomas's ghost, allowing Edith to kill her with the shovel. Edith silently bids Thomas farewell before he vanishes. Edith and Alan are rescued by the villagers, and Lucille becomes the ghost of Allerdale Hall, playing her piano for all eternity. Okay, so now we got some trivia for the film. We haven't had trivia on a film in a little while, but let's get straight into it. When Del Toro pitched the film to Charlie Hunnam, he told the actor that he'd be playing the damsel in distress, and Hunnam was immediately sold on the movie. I'm not a huge fan of Charlie Hunnam. My friend who used to do this podcast with me, he passed away about a year ago. He was a huge fan of Charlie Hunnam, and he probably would have loved this for him being in this. He used to love Sons of Anarchy, and he'd watch anything with him in it. But I think he does a pretty good job. Like, I didn't even know it was him at first. Honestly, I think like he was really good. Like not playing something. Playing something more in like a period piece rather than, how there's certain actors where you just can't see them in a period piece or outside of a period piece. Either way, they just have like that fit for or not for, something like that. Honestly, that's kind of how I considered him. I thought he'd be more of like a contemporary. He'd have to be in something more set like now or in like the more modern day, rather than a period piece, and he does a really good job, honestly. Like, I'll say this right now, like, all the actors in this film do a great job, and he doesn't really stand out or anything, but I think it just goes to show, like, he can play something more subtle than something more modern. I think I know what, if you know what I'm saying, but, yeah. It's great to see him in this because he was in, I believe, Pacific Rim, so I'm pretty sure that's where Del Toro likes to, work with a lot of the same actors that he's used before, which is kind of strange because usually Ron Perlman's in something, and usually in the film. He's not in this one, which is kind of strange to see that he's not in it, so, whatever. In an interview, Del Toro said that the color red is associated with the ghosts. Only those linked to the ghosts wear red, and red does not appear anywhere else in the film except at the hall. And honestly, yeah, I can see that right away. it didn't really stand out to begin with, but once the red hits on the clay and then in the hall itself, and you see it paired with like the blues and the darks and all the darker colors and the everything else, it really hits and makes that really stand out really well. Especially then when you see the ghost and it's this like bloody red looking thing, crimson-esque being that's just like kind of semi-translucent, but then also kind of looks physically there, and I love the effect that they did for those. And it just, I love that he did that. It's something that M. Night Shyamalan did with the Sixth Sense, where like red represents like this, like the ghosts as well, like the idea of like anything, like he like no, there's like a balloon that's red, like the tent he uses is red, I think, and I know that there's like a door handle that's got like red on it. So it's just this idea of using like color as a way to express like this is meant for you to link in your head like, oh yeah, it's the ghosts. And he does that really well. The final scene in the film, from which the opening scene for the film was taken, was filmed on the soundstage with the actual prop machine, fake snow, and fog machines. Guillermo del Toro enjoys putting his actors into as complete a space as possible, so as to elicit very real reactions from them. This is why he also has an actor play the part of the ghost, so the actors have a body to interact with. Mia said that in an interview that it was very disorienting because it was just white everywhere, and being on that space helped her portray the dizziness and anxiety of that scene. And I think that's awesome that he like built basically in the space like a white void for them to feel this kind of isolation and this idea that like if you just walked out, you would just keep walking and walking forever into nothing. And then the red just stands out on the floor too, so like it leads back to this kind of bleeding, like bloody looking floor, which is just the clay from the earth. That set though looks amazing. I think they did a great job with that. Tom Hiddleston also played the ghost of Thomas Sharp, as Guillermo del Toro prefers to keep his sets and characters as tangible as he possibly can, which is what we discussed right before. And we know that he likes to do everything as practical as he can. With Thomas's ghost physically being there, Mia Wasikowska was able to touch him and react to his presence. Hiddleston sat through 3 hours of makeup to apply a full facial prosthetic, paint, wig, etc. The VFX department then created the transparency of the ghost, as well as the tendrils of blood seeping from his face, which honestly, that at the end where she's able to like touch his face for a little bit and then like it passed through, and the blood like seeping up, and just the makeup looks like, see, that's why I think Guillermo del Toro is amazing. And like he and the people who work with him and work for him and you know like that are in the special effects that he employs, they're stellar. They are amazing. They knock it out of the park every time. Like Pan's Labyrinth, amazing. Hellboy 1 and 2, and I think I like it's just so great that he still employs like, no, I don't want to do like. I mean, if we're going to do special effects, like visual special effects, like CGI, I want it to go hand in hand with like the practical effects. And that's why I think it works like so much better than rather just having like some CGI version of Tom Hiddleston, right? Or having him physically be there the whole like, I mean, that kind of maybe would have been cool, like just a practical without the VFX, but that's what I think CGI is meant for, is to enhance where the practical can't go to. So like her hand passing through, making him a little more ethereal, right, and opaque, and you can see through him. Like that's what it's meant to do. Like that's what it's meant to be there for, to be enhancing, not there to replace. Like they're supposed to go hand in hand. They're supposed to go like, oh, okay, the reason why it looks so good is because he's actually there. He's actually in this prosthetic, but they enhanced it with. And I think more people should take that into account with like, a lot of things. In the scene where Edith, having stabbed Lucille, runs toward the elevator and meets Thomas coming out of the elevator, there was originally meant to be a speech that Tom Hiddleston described as very beautiful, heartfelt confession of Thomas's crimes and love for Edith. However, on the day, both Tom and Guillermo agreed that the speech, however beautiful, was too wordy. They, together with Mia, rewrote the scene in about 10 minutes to a very short exchange that happens in the scene, which they all agreed was more believable in the moment and just as powerful on screen as the wordy speech was on the page. And that right there is why you need to interact with not just you as a director, not just the producers, not just the people financing, not just the writers, not just the DP, not just the set, the PAs, the set designers, the genie, all these people. You also need to interact with the actors. You have to understand that they're there too. They're doing a job. They're doing a performance. And sometimes they too understand because they've been getting into this idea of the character. Sometimes they get into the character more than maybe they should. Some say, I don't know, whatever. But you should get them, and it's more of that's what film is. It's a collaborative effort. And sitting there or standing there or being there on set and, understanding that, what, we could do this a lot quicker and it's still meaningful and powerful, but just we cut it down, like, not because what you wrote is bad or anything like that, but it's just maybe it doesn't fit for the character, it doesn't fit for the scene, it doesn't fit for what's going on, like the pacing or anything like that. And they could see that too. So having them work with you, I think that's what's great about this, about film, about being someone like Guillermo del Toro who is able to sit there and be like, you're right. Let's sit here, let's talk it through. Not just me, you, and the other person in your scene, and we're going to take the time and we're going to work through this. Like, what would you think they would say? What do you think they would do? How do you think they would react? And it makes for a better scene than what maybe the scene you wrote would have been like, oh yeah, that's an Academy Award worthy just from right there. But then you sit there and you're like, yeah, but it takes away from this or it takes away from that or it kind of hinders this or doesn't make really a lot of sense to this. Like, why would you monologue or make this grand speech right here, right? And maybe it makes it make a lot more sense to the film. And you can do all that with less. And that's kind of what you want to do too. You want to kind of show, not tell. And I think the idea of him just burning the deed and all the stuff that she signed, right? Like, I feel like that's kind of what it was, that right there, that kind of was more powerful than him giving this grand speech. Or maybe he like ripped it all up or whatever. But we won't know what that scene was supposed to be, but it works well for the ending of the film. Now we come to the part that I was kind of referencing in the beginning. So in 2010, Guillermo del Toro was set to direct a genuine horror adaptation of Disney's Haunted Mansion, but ultimately stepped away from the project. That's the film that I was kind of referencing at the beginning. I didn't want to talk about it, don't really want to promote it here, just because the writer's strike and the actor's strike. I want to support them and not promote that film at all. But I do want to talk about the history of Crimson Peak and how it has a little bit of DNA from that film and that project that he was working on. So it was first announced in 2010 at San Diego Comic-Con. Disney, they made a surprise reveal that Del Toro would be working on a reboot of the 2003 adaptation. Del Toro and writer Matthew Robbins began developing the script, with Del Toro having artists create over 40 pieces of concept art. Del Toro wanted to lean into the more darker aspects of the ride and said, quote, "We are not making a comedy. We'll make it scary and fun at the same time. For me, Mansion needs to be the haunted house movie for this generation." All we know of the plot is that the Hatbox Ghost was going to be the central figure and would travel to these other mansions via the endless staircase, which doesn't appear in the Disneyland ride, but it does appear in the Disney World ride, the Magic Kingdom ride. So if you're used to that one and you don't know what the Endless Staircase is, it's kind of understandable. One of the only bits of casting that we know of this film is that Ryan Gosling was supposed to be in it, and he might have played the Hatbox Ghost, but we're not sure. Disney and Del Toro parted ways, and that's how we got Crimson Peak. He just took everything that he was doing with that film, and he just kind of adapted to this, and you can kind of feel that in this film. There's things that reference the ride, like the piano playing, the bride themselves, being a ghost. Like this person, the mansion itself, this dilapidated mansion. There's just things here and there that kind of reference the ride, and you can clearly tell like they were probably going to be part of that film, but then Del Toro was like, they're not letting me use it. I'm gonna just use it for my own film. Especially like there's like the groundskeeper with the dog, right? Like that's straight up from the ride. And it would have been interesting to see his version. I know Disney though really probably would not have let him lean into like that more scary, especially at the time of 2010. I think if it was more now, I think they probably would let him do it, maybe. Because especially films like, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and things like that, where you can have this kind of like more like darker films for kids that kind of pushes it a little bit in terms of like what they're seeing in like the effects and like what they're seeing visually. And I think he could have done it now. Like if Disney wanted him to do it now, I think it would have worked better than back then, because back then, think about this. Disney was a big company, but it wasn't as big as it is now. The Avengers haven't come out yet. They barely got Star Wars, I think. And if they didn't have it yet, they were going to get it soon. And then they would start developing all of what we got from Star Wars in the last 10 years. So, yeah, it would have been great. It would have been, honestly, it probably would have been just this, but have the name, actually have like Disney's, and it would have probably been closer. They would have been able to use like the names from the ride and this and that. But ultimately, I bet it probably would have been a similar film, maybe less brutal. I'm going to talk about that right now, and when we get into the kill counter, but. I honestly think this would have been a great film. Kill counter. Okay, so now's the part where we get into all the deaths in the film. There are 3 deaths in this particular film, with quite a few off screen and that are prior to the film. But let's just focus on these 3 that we see on screen. First, not long into the film, we see the very visceral death of Carter Cushing, Edith's father. He's left alone in the bathroom as he shaves. Hears a sound, he goes to investigate, doesn't see anyone, goes back to the faucet. Then, we get to see someone putting on gloves, these black gloves, and an unknown assailant, which we learn later in the film is Lucille, brutally kills Cushing by bashing his head into the sink. And I was honestly truly taken aback by how real and brutal this sequence was. I'm not someone who's easily unsettled with a lot of things, but this was just like not expected. Like it just came out of nowhere. I was like, whoa, this is a lot more real looking than I thought. The next death, though, is that of Baronet Sir Thomas Sharp. After confessing that he has truly fallen in love with Edith, Lucille stabs him to death, and he later appears as a ghost at the end, stopping Lucille from cleaving Edith just as she had her own mother. And Edith bids him a farewell as he disappears. And like I said, the effect on him is amazing. And it's not that... this one, she just kind of stabs him. You don't really see anything too gruesome. And then the last and final death comes at the end of the film, and that's the death of Lucille Sharp. After Edith has found out about the Sharps, the relationship. And Thomas, he burns the paperwork and tells Edith that he loves her, and Lucille stabs him, and now she's trying to kill Edith with the cleaver that she did with her mom. She stopped from killing Edith by the ghost of Thomas, but this kind of allows Edith to pick up the shovel and just bash her brains in. We don't see anything too gruesome. That's why it's so jarring that that first death is just so brutal and oh my god. And then the last one, or the last two deaths, are just very subtle. They're not anything too crazy. We don't see her the blood splattering everywhere as she's bashing her head in or anything like that. But I mean, she still gets her head caved in with a shovel. And then we get to see her ghost at the end of the film playing the piano, haunting Allerdale Hall. And the kills, they're just fine. There's nothing special. I mean, except for that first death. This is the death of Cushing. I could go on and on about, because it's just so real looking and just so fucking brutal. And they smashed that fake head so hard into the sink. Whoever did it must have been letting out some kind of anger. And Del Toro just knows just when to make something feel so real. It reminds me of Nightmare Alley, that movie. There's parts of it where it's just so, when he becomes a goon, that it's just whoa. He knows when to make something feel very real. Now we move on to the part of the podcast where I give my final thoughts on the film. So I never watched this film until recently. This was after learning that this was basically Guillermo del Toro's version of that ride from that company. I'm a huge fan of Del Toro's, especially because he's a Mexican filmmaker, and me being Mexican-American filmmaker, I really identify with him and his inspirations, because a lot of his inspirations are a lot of my inspirations. The idea of making a haunted house film, wanting to make a kaiju film, adapting a comic book like Hellboy, and then things like The Shape of Water and Nightmare Alley. A lot of his style, I just love, and that's what I would love to do someday, just to be able to be bring these kind of fantastical worlds, or kind of bring something more subtle like the Crimson Peak or Nightmare Alley. And honestly, I thought this would be a little bit more boring because it's a period piece, and sometimes a period piece can become stale, or could be just seen as oh, they're using this flowery language that no one really understands anymore, and oh, what this and that, it could get old, or it could be very you're gonna sit there bored. But he makes it very digestible, especially for the period of time it's set. You're whoa, kind of feels a little bit more modern, but you understand that it's still set then, and it works really well, and it kept my attention. And honestly, I could see a lot from what he's doing here and how it goes towards everything else he makes later. And the use of colors with the red, especially that crimson color that comes through with the ghosts, the women, when they're with the baby and everything. It's just so gruesome, and it just looks so good. It looks like he ripped the skin off of of a body and was here you go. Here's what's supposed to be a monster, was supposed to be what you're scared of, but in the end you find out no, you're supposed to be more sympathetic. And that's what I really like too, is that you're supposed to be more, a lot of times his movies are, supposed to be more sympathetic to the monster than to the people who are the true monsters, in The Shape of Water, where this fish man is not the monster, it's Michael Shannon. Or in Nightmare Alley, where in the end, the true monster is the people who create these monsters that turn like Bradley Cooper into the Goon. And I just the effects, I love this idea of using practical and CGI. It works so well, like in Rogue One. It's a great example of, mixing these practical effects with visual effects, and it comes out so well. It looks so good, like, because you can tell something's actually there, but then it's actually like enhanced with, like when his ghost at the end, like you can feel the weight of him there as she touches his face, and then her hand passes through, and you're like, whoa, because you could see through him, and you get this quality of like, is he really there? Is he not there? And it's just, I love that effect, and it's great. It's great. I love like everything about this. The set design, just the acting from Mia, Jessica, Tom, Charlie, all of them work together so well, and you feel like it's set in this time, like they actually are living this, and that the haunted feeling you get from the house is there from beginning to end. And I was enthralled with the film, and that's why I love Guillermo del Toro. I think he's a great director, and I honestly am a little bummed out like we didn't get his Hobbit, the version of his Hobbits films, because he was going to initially do one, and then we learned that he was going to do two, and then he left, and what's his name, Peter Jackson, decided to do three, and it's kind of ridiculous because I was already stretching. I was thinking, you're stretching too, and three was way beyond it, and just became ridiculous. But I've Pan's Labyrinth, amazing. The Hellboys, both of them, so good. Pacific Rim, I love Pacific Rim, and The Shape of Water, winning Best Picture. He's an Academy Award winning filmmaker. I can't wait to see what else he does. And they do, all the actors in this do such a great job. You feel like they are from this era. You feel like they've lived in this world. Honestly, 10 out of 10. I love this movie. I'm kind of kicking myself now for not having watched it earlier, especially when it came out. It came out so long ago that I'm like, why did I not see this when it came out? But it is good. It's really good, and honestly, highly recommend it, especially if you like Del Toro's films. So what did you think of Crimson Peak? Did you like it? Did you find it overrated? Would you rather we got Del Toro's full vision of the reboot of the Mansion film? Or did we get something better? Please let me know on our socials. Thank you all for listening, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to get every new episode downloaded. Do you have any strange, mysterious, or unexplained stories? Are they fact? Did you create them yourself? If you'd like us to read your stories, you can email them to horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com, and we'd love to read them on the podcast. We'd also like to post these stories on our socials on Instagram, Threads, or TikTok at Horrorbox Podcast, where we also have updates and news. One last thing, if you like the podcast and would like to support the podcast, buy me a coffee. You can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/horrorboxpodcast. It would really help out. We'll see you next time and hear what comes out from the horror box.